Good morning, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Hawk Blogger Mornings. I am Brian Nemhauser. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Hawk Blogger. Happy Friday. Happy Friday. The day has come before the long weekend. I hope you all have fun plans ahead. I know my wife's going to check out Billy Joel tonight. Not sure who else is into that, but I miraculously managed to not go to that concert, which works out well for me. But hope if you enjoy it, you're going to be there. And I think there's some other concerts going on this weekend as well. So get out there, have some fun, enjoy time with yourself, your fam, your friends, whoever it might be. And if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel, give it a like, click the bell to get notified. We got a bunch of great content coming up. This Sunday, we are bringing back the boys. We are going to have the Rob Staten, Griff Sturgeon roundtable back to talk Seahawks on Sunday. So we will see you 2:00 Sunday. I'll get that posted soon. We're going to have Brady Henderson in next week. I hope to have Mike Sando as well and a few other folks in the mix. So a lot of great content coming up as we continue to march towards training camp in July, really. So we got a little ways to go. I see Hawks fan Matt Man in chat. Good morning. Good morning, Plenipote. Great to have our YouTube members there. You can be a YouTube member as well. All you got to do is click the link that is in the chat. It's pinned there. It's in the description of the video. And you can be a YouTube member. It'd be great to have you as part of the community. And we thank all the folks that already are active parts of the YouTube membership, as well as all of our patrons over at patreon.com/hawkblogger. Love the community, love bringing people together around the Seahawks, and appreciate all the support. Well, I hope you got a chance to see the thumbnail for this YouTube video. I decided to have a little fun with this one, and we'll see if I push the boundaries too far. But as I have mentioned, I think I mentioned this last night on Real Hawk Talk, which was a fun show. Nathan and Jeff and I went through a bunch of stuff, and it was great to catch up with those guys. That show will be posted audio-wise, hopefully today, but you can check out the YouTube replay anytime you want. Anyway, I mentioned I was going to look at the question, how do young coaches fare? Do young coaches, head coaches, win in the NFL? If you don't know it, you should. That Mike Macdonald is the youngest coach in the NFL as we enter this season. He is 36 years old. As of right now, that is the youngest head coach in the NFL. So what I wanted to do is actually go through some of the other guys that have been young head coaches and see what's realistic. What did they do in their first go around? Did they improve in their first year? As we kind of grapple with this transition from Pete Carroll, who's a legend and almost certainly a Hall of Fame coach, to a guy who's never done the job before, we have to kind of guess at how this is going to go. And part of the way to do that is to kind of look back at history and see how other people in similar positions did in their forays. So what I've done, as you've enjoyed, hopefully you've noticed lately, been trying to create a little bit more visual content for the show, so you're not just staring at me. And yes, I put Sean McVey in diapers because he is the youngest head coach to ever do it. And frankly, anything I can do to make fun of Sean McVey, I will do. And let's get into it. Let's get into it. I will describe all this for folks that are listening and not watching. We're going to go through from youngest, not to oldest, but along the way. And the youngest head coach to ever do it is Sean McVey. And so I had a few questions that I personally was curious about as I compiled this info. Sean McVey was 30 years, 11 months old, so almost 31. That's 5 years younger a full 5 years younger than Mike Macdonald. And I don't know about any of you, but 5 years is a long time. A lot changes, a lot of maturing happens, a lot of experience happens. So I think it's almost not comparable to be 30 versus 36, but it still is the youngest head coach here in the NFL. The other thing I wanted to know as I did this was to ask the question, had this person ever been a head coach before? And it might seem silly to ask that question since, well, if they're the youngest head coach, they probably haven't been a head coach, but that's not necessarily true. And you'll see in some cases that isn't true, that they might have coached in head coach in high school. Might have been a head coach in college. They might have been a head coach. Who knows? And so I was curious if this was also, as it is for Mike Macdonald, their first time as a head coach. And then the other things that I have here, I have their record. In this case, with Sean McVey, 70-45 is his record. And what was the improvement year one from a win total perspective? And for Sean McVey, it was a significant jump of 7 wins from where the Rams had been 4-12 under coach John Fossil and Jeff Fisher in 2016. And then in 2017, they went 11-5 and won the division. So went from third place, 4-12 in 2016 to first place, an 11-5 record in his first season with the Rams. I think it's also worth noting that the Rams offense, which he was an offensive guru, that was why he was hired. The Rams offense was 32nd in the NFL in scoring. 32 out of 32. They averaged 14 points a game. And they did have Jared Goff on the team. He only played 7 games that year, but he was on the team. Case Keenum got the majority of starts. They had Todd Gurley, so they had a lot of these guys that were on the Rams roster under McVey. And then the next year, they went from dead last in the NFL in scoring to number 1 in the NFL in scoring at 29.9 points a game. They doubled. They more than doubled their scoring from 14 points to 29.9 points per game in McVay's first season. So is it realistic to hope or expect that Mike Macdonald could take the 30, what was the Seahawks? It was down there close to worst in the NFL. It was 25th in scoring on defense. How high could they take it? I don't know. We'll find out. So a 7-win improvement, which is massive. And he did eventually win a Super Bowl with the Rams. I have a super chat. It is a tangent, but I'm going to answer it because I try to address super chats. Garth Knight asks, Brian, does your dog swim and fetch? By the way, your dog is awesome regardless. Thank you. Finn is awesome. He and I have gone hiking a bunch the last month or two. He absolutely fetches. He does swim, but he doesn't do it that often. He's a big furry guy, and he doesn't seem to get in that often. Thanks for the super chat, Garth. All right. Powering on. So that's Sean McVay, the youngest to do it, and still doing it. The next youngest to do it is Lane Kiffin of the Oakland Raiders back when he was the coach. Lane Kiffin was 31 years old and 8 months. He had not been a previous head coach. His record with the Raiders was 5-15. He did not last long. And I'm double checking. Yes. So he replaced, if you might remember, Art Shell, who was the head coach in 2006 for the Raiders. He had been fired. He only got 1 year. Before that, it was Norv Turner. And so the Raiders had been in a bit of a spiral. Lane Kiffin did manage to improve in year one the record. The Raiders had gone 4-12 in 2005, then 2-14 in 2006. Lane Kiffin got them back to 4-12. So it wasn't exactly something to celebrate, but it was a mild improvement. Interestingly, Kiffin was also thought of as an offensive guru, and he took what was the 32nd ranked offense in 2006 that had averaged 10.5 points a game and moved him up to 23rd, 17.7 points a game. Almost doubled. Well, 75% improvement on scoring, which is pretty good. I mean, the defense went the other direction, but he did make a difference on the offense and did improve their win total, but did not win a Super Bowl. That's Lane Kiffin. And if you go back and you look at Lane Kiffin's career from there, after the Oakland gig, he was the head coach at Tennessee and then at USC, and then it was the OC at Alabama, and then head coach at Florida Atlantic, and now is the head coach at Ole Miss. I think that he has gone on to be a relatively successful head coach in other systems, other places, other times. Okay. Next, Raheem Morris, pictured here drinking out of the fountain in the classroom. For some reason, he is in a classroom that looks like it's in Korea, maybe? Or, yeah, I don't know what language that is on the board, but you guys can't read it anyway, so don't worry about it. Raheem Morris was 32 years and 4 months when he was first hired as the Bucs head coach. So still 4 years younger than Mike Macdonald. He had not been a previous head coach. He came from a defensive background. Had be a defensive backs coach, defensive coordinator. He was actually defensive coordinator at Kansas State in college when he was 30, and then came back to the NFL and for a couple of years was the defensive backs coach in Tampa Bay. Interestingly, he had never even been a NFL coordinator when he was hired to be a head coach. So it's an even bigger leap, quite a bit bigger leap to go from a defensive backs coach to a head coach and skipping coordinator altogether. So he had not been a head coach. He had not been a coordinator even. His record was 21-38 as a head coach. And unfortunately for Mr. Morris, the Bucs went the wrong direction in his first season. They went from Jon Gruden, who had won a Super Bowl with them and had a 9-7 record in 2008, to a -6 win change to 3-13 in 2009. They really cratered after Jon Gruden left. They had Jeff Garcia as the quarterback under Gruden, and when Morris started in his first year, they were Josh Freeman, Josh Johnson, Byron Leftwich. it was a mess at quarterback. They didn't know what they were doing. And I think the coach kind of didn't help there either. And Morris was a defensive guy. And the defense went the wrong direction. The defense went from 10th in the NFL to 27th in the NFL. Now, I'm going to check to see. They may have lost some players. Derek Brooks was at the end of his career. He was 35 back then. Rondé Barber was 33, at least for Gruden. Let's see if they were still around a year later. They were not. So those, Rondé Barber was still there, but Derek Brooks retired. And that defense was, it was a very different defense. And it was a rebuilding kind of situation. So he definitely did not win a Super Bowl. And Raheem Morris would only last 3 seasons as head coach in Tampa Bay. And as we know, he just recently got his second head coaching opportunity, now at age 48, with the Atlanta Falcons. So a 16-year difference in age when he got his second head coaching gig. Another super chat from Garth Knight. He says, the Vegas Raiders should be coached by the tandem of Suge Knight and Mark Davis. They are a joke of an ASC franchise. The Raiders certainly have not been good for a very, very, very long time. All right, let's keep going. David Shula. Sorry, he made this face, and I just had to do this picture. I won't describe it for those that are not watching, but it felt appropriate. David Shula, not to be confused with Don Shula, was 32 years and 7 months old. And he was hired by the Bengals. He did not do so well. And I don't know how, other than the fact that the Bengals ownership is cheap, how he kept his job for so long. He went 19-52 as a head coach. He did not have a winning record in any of his seasons and didn't come that close. And despite that, he did manage to eke out a 2-win improvement for the Bengals in 1992. They went 5-11 after having gone 3-13 under Sam Weish the year before. Under Weish, they were 23rd on offense and 28th on defense. That went to 18th and 24th. So he improved on both. David Shula did in his first year. So there was some improvement in the quality of the team his first year. And suffice to say, he did not ever win a Super Bowl. Next on the list, Josh McDaniels. Now, Josh McDaniels, there's a question about whether Shula was there during the Carson Palmer years. And I will tell you, I believe he had Boomer Esiason David Klingler. I think this was earlier than Jeff Blake. Yeah, he did not have Carson Palmer. All right, so Josh McDaniels, he was 32 years and 8 months. And this was when he was the head coach of the Broncos. He's had a couple of head coaching jobs. And he also had a pretty big separation between his 2 head coaching gigs, as he was recently also fired, or a second time, by the Raiders. This time by the Raiders, the first time by the Broncos. He also only lasted 2 seasons and not even 2 full seasons both times. He got fired in his second season both times. So be really careful as an owner if you're going to try to hire Josh McDaniels. The track record is not good. So he had not been a previous head coach. His record, this is total. I kind of went back and forth. His record overall is 20-33 as a head coach. His record just as a Broncos head coach was 11-17. Either way, losing record. He, in his first year as head coach for the Broncos, went 8-8. And they had gone 8-8 the year before. McDaniels was brought in as an offensive guy under, Bill Belichick and with Tom Brady. And they went from Mike Shanahan to, Hall of Fame guy to McDaniels. The Broncos in 2008 had been 16th in offense and 30th in defense. In 2009, under McDaniels, they went 20th in offense and 12th in defense. So they improved in defense quite a bit, but they dropped 4 spots in offense, which was really what he was supposed to be doing. Now, he had Kyle Orton as his quarterback. And I will say that they had Jay Cutler the year before. So it was a pretty big drop in quality of quarterback from Cutler to Orton. And he also ended up with Tim Tebow, for what that's worth. So he did not improve in year 1. He did not win a Super Bowl. So if you're keeping a score along here, that's not a lot of good results for these guys other than Sean McVey. It does get better. Next on the list, speaking of getting better, the most lovable head coach, maybe the most lovable football personality, John Madden. If you didn't know it, John Madden was one of the youngest head coaches in history. He was hired at age 32 years and 10 months. So almost 33, but 32 years, 10 months. He did have previous head coaching experience. He had been a head coach at Allen Hancock College when he was 26 years old in 1962. He coached there as a head coach for 2 years before he became a defensive coordinator for San Diego State and then a linebackers coach for the Oakland Raiders in 1967 when he was 31. And then in 1969, at the age of 32 years and 10 months, he became the head coach of the Oakland Raiders. So he had been a head coach before. He had been a defensive coordinator before. He had been a linebackers coach, a position coach before. So he had a decent amount of things that he had done. His record was a sterling 103-32. There's a reason a game got named after him. Interestingly, though, the team did not improve in its first season with him as head coach. They had been 12-2. I mean, arguably you could say that they didn't win more games. They had a better record under him, but they were 12-2 and they were first place under coach John Roush in 1968. In Madden's first year in 1969, they went 12-1-1. So they lost one fewer game, but they did not win more games, and they finished first place. So they did do the same in that regard. The offense was first in the league in 1968. It was first in the league in 1969. The defense was second in the league in 68. It was second in the league in 69. So to some extent, Madden inherited a very different situation. It is not often that you have a new head coach when you finish first in your division and finish first and second on offense and defense. But that's exactly what happened with Madden. And he did eventually win a Super Bowl with that Raiders crew. It took him, till 1976. So he was 40 years old by the time they won a Super Bowl, 8 years into coaching. And along the way, he went 12-1 that first year, and then he dipped down to 8-4, and then to 8-4 again, and then up to 10-3, and then 9-4. There's a lot of ties back then, by the way. And then 12-2, 11-3, and finally 13-1. And in 1976, they won the Super Bowl. So it wasn't exactly like a straight line for him to get from where he started to a Super Bowl team, but he did get there and he did win one. All right. Next on the list, another Shula, but one that should be more encouraging. Don Shula, if you didn't know, was also one of the youngest coaches to ever coach in the NFL. He was 33 years old, pretty much in like a couple of days. He had not been a head coach before. His experience had been as a defensive backs coach in college at both Virginia and Kentucky. And then it was a defensive back coach for the Lions, and then became a defensive coordinator for the Lions in 1961 and 1962 before jumping to be a head coach of, do you remember who his first head coaching gig was? It was not the Dolphins. It was the Baltimore Colts. Don Shula's first head coaching gig was with the Baltimore Colts in 1963. And I have his overall record showing here. So this is his overall record. He is the winningest coach in the NFL, in NFL history. 328 wins, 156 losses. As good as that is, he only had a 1-year improvement in his first season as head coach of the Colts. So the team was 7-7 under Weeb Eubank in 1962. They went to 8-6 under Don Shula in his first year. They had been 8th on offense and 6th on defense. They became 7th on offense and 7th on defense. So not a significant change in year one. You may or may not know this, depending on how much you follow NFL history. But he did win his first Super Bowl with, well, technically it was not a Super Bowl. So if we want to be really picky, it was not a Super Bowl. He won his first NFL championship with the Colts in 1968. So this was before the Super Bowl era. He would win his first Super Bowl with the Dolphins a few years later, but I consider being the NFL champion equivalent in 1968. It also took him a little while before he got there. He was 8-6 in his first year, 12-2 in his second year, 10-3 in his third, 9-5 in his fourth, 11-1 in his fifth, and 13-1 in his sixth year. That is the year that they won the NFL championship. So it took him 6 years to get to a Super Bowl and win it, or a championship and win it. He did have winning records every year, although his first year was just 8-6. Not bad. Not bad for Mr. Don Shula. And as you know, he would go on to win multiple Super Bowls, back-to-back Super Bowls in 72 and 73, coached the only undefeated team in NFL history. So another positive example of whether young coaches win. Another super chat from Garth. Thank you for the super chat, Garth. He says, Brian, if you had to pick a subject head coaches should thrive in to be effective, what would it be? It's a good question. I generally think about head coaches as needing one of two things. And it really depends on what the team needs sometimes to determine which is most important. One is scheme expertise, some sort of scheme advantage. And this can be tactically, this can be play calling strategically, understanding how to actually sequence plays, how to adjust, how to be the team that other teams are having to respond to as opposed to always being reactive. So having some sort of scheme expertise or scheme advantage, I think, is one. And we've got a lot of examples of that we can talk about. The other is to be a CEO, essentially someone who is excellent at running organizations and leading men, because there is so much adversity and so much micro drama and macro drama that happens throughout being a NFL head coach, managing all these egos, all these careers, the livelihoods of all these people, including your assistant coaches, dealing with owners, dealing with general managers, scouts, like there's press. I think that's an underappreciated aspect. And it's part of what Pete Carroll was so good at, where Pete Carroll, I think a lot of the wins that he was able to get over an expected amount was due to this ability to be a great leader and motivate and manage all these different alpha men in this situation and get people to give their best effort. Because the other thing that's a challenge is you could be a great scheme guy. You could be really like a little genius, but if people don't want to play for you and they're already millionaires or they're making a lot of money, then it's already they're putting their lives on the line in some cases to play this game, then you end up like Josh McDaniels. Josh McDaniels might be a really smart offensive coach, but nobody wants to play for him. And so if you're not getting good effort out there, I think we saw that with Jim Mora Jr. In his year, the team literally, like, they quit on him the last part of the year. The effort just was not there. So even if you are good on the scheme, everyone focuses on the McVeys, the geniuses, all this kind of stuff. And I think that's great. But you have to have at least some ability to command a room and get people to follow you. So that's one of the reasons I really like Mike McDaniel in Miami, because I think not only is he a genius on the offensive side of the ball, but you get really clear signals from him that he understands people and he understands what motivates people. And he also can keep things fun and relatable for his players. I have to tell you, I was a little surprised that Mike McDaniel wasn't on this list. I think of him as being in his 20s practically. I think he's 40 years old. So that was an interesting thing as I was going through this, that he was not higher on this list of youngest coaches. But thanks you for the question. Thanks for the question, Garth. Continue. I think I might have one more. Maybe I have more than one more. I don't know. Jon Gruden is on this list. Chucky. And Chucky was 34 years old and 5 months when he started as a Raiders coach. He had not been a previous head coach. His experience before, he had been like a passing game coordinator, a wide receivers coach in college. Then he was an offensive assistant with the 49ers, went back to college as a wide receivers coach, offensive assistant with Mike Holmgren in Green Bay, wide receivers coach there. And then he was an offensive coordinator for the Eagles for 3 years before he became the head coach of the Raiders. So he had coordinator and position coach experience. His record was just 117 and 112. And again, this is his overall record. It is not just his record with Oakland. His record with Oakland, if I want to do the math here really quickly, 38 and 26 was his record in Oakland, if I'm doing the math right. He did improve the record of that Raiders team by 4 wins. They had been 4-12 under Joe Bugle in 1997. They improved to 8-8 in year 1 in 1998 with Gruden. And that's one of the larger changes, honestly. If you've been paying attention through here, a lot of these guys did not make significant improvements to the win total in year 1. So it was one of the larger improvements. It wasn't like McVey in his first year where it was a 7-win improvement, but it was still significant. Now, I have him as winning a Super Bowl, but I have an asterisk by it because he didn't win that Super Bowl with the team that hired him when he was the youngest head coach. Jon Gruden was traded to the Bucs and won a Super Bowl with the Bucs in his first season in Tampa Bay. And I did want to check to see the farthest that Gruden got with the Raiders was winning the divisional round and losing in the AFC Conference Championship to the Baltimore Ravens. So he did take the Raiders from being a team that before he got there was 4-12 and just 3 years later, he got them to the conference championship. A pretty steep slope of improvement for Jon Gruden as a coach for the Raiders. But he did not win his Super Bowl until he got to Tampa Bay. So going through that again quickly, let's talk about first year improvement. I'm going to talk about a couple other coaches as well because there's some other coaches I didn't create content for, but we can still talk about them. McVey, 7-win improvement in year one. Kiffin, 2-year improvement. Raheem Morris, -6. David Shula, +2. Josh McDaniels, nothing. John Madden, nothing. Don Shula, 1-game improvement. John Madden, 4-game improvement. So you're generally looking at 2 games or fewer improvement, and in a lot of cases, 1 game or essentially the same record. When you talk about Mike Macdonald, you also have to think about what is the situation that he's inheriting. Of all of these guys, if I kind of go back through this, how many of them inherited a team that had a winning record the year before? Let's take a look. It was not Raheem Morris did, I believe. Yes, he had Jon Gruden had a 9-7 record, so he inherited a winning, but it was a very different team. That was an aging team that Raheem Morris inherited. Derek Brooks was his last year, that kind of thing. Lane Kiffin definitely did not inherit a winning team. Sean McVey did not inherit a winning team. John Madden did. But even with John Madden inheriting a winning team, a very good team, it took him 7-8 years before he got to an NFL championship or a Super Bowl. So I think Mike Macdonald's in a bit of a different situation. There's some young talent on this crew that he has to get the most out of. In some ways, I feel like this is most related to what Sean McVey had. A lot of the players that Sean McVey had on the team were already there. So Jared Goff was already there. Todd Gurley was already there. Kenny Britt, the receiver, was already there. Tyler Higbee was there. Tavon Austin, Greg Zuerlein. I mean, a lot of these guys, Johnny Hecker, these are the names that you know of. Aaron Donald was already there. So there's a number of these guys that, I mean, Robert Quinn. So, I mean, he inherited a pretty talented team and managed to kind of unlock them. And as I look through, names in his first season, almost none of the guys that were great players for them in his first season were new. He just managed to unlock a lot of their potential. And I think that that's probably, I'm not saying that, the Seahawks, I'm not saying the Seahawks have the same situation where you have, NFL defensive player of the year level guy that's already been proven in Aaron Donald on this squad, or that you've got number 1 overall pick that's a young quarterback there. But you do have Devin Witherspoon, who has significant upside. You do have Tariq Woolen, who has significant upside. You do have Byron Murphy. You do have Leonard Williams. You do have DK Metcalf. You do have Geno Smith, who is very similar in a lot of ways to Jared Goff. The difference, as you look at Sean McVay's situation, he brought in Wade Phillips as his defensive coordinator. Very like the opposite of the youngest head coach is Wade Phillips, who is this grizzled vet defensive coordinator and could just totally take over that side of the ball so that Sean McVey could focus almost entirely on offense. That is why Ryan Grubb, that hire, and Scott Huff are so important. All this attention is going to be on Mike Macdonald, but for Mike Macdonald to be the coach that we all hope he can be, Ryan Grubb has to cook. Like, he has to be very good at his job and have total ownership over it. And that's why Scott Huff coming with him was also really big, because Ryan Grubb does not have to worry about coordinating and gaining chemistry with his offensive line coach. They already speak the same language. So that's part of what I think, if you want to be most bullish on the Seahawks situation and what's going on here, you would look at this and say, all right, let's have a offensive coach who knows who he is. He's not the youngest head coach. He is a new NFL coordinator, but Ryan Grubb has been a offensive coordinator for many years. And he's 48 years old. And he's going to have a offensive line coach that is going to be in line with him about run. I mean, remember when Pete Carroll first came and Darrell Bevell was eventually the offensive coordinator, but Tom Cable was the running game coordinator, and they would have to mesh their run game plans and pass game plans together. And at times it worked, but at times it was really messy. The fact that they're going to be able to have Ryan Grubb and Scott Huff be such a tight crew, I just think is a really, really big deal. And if that allows Mike Macdonald to really put his focus on the defense, I think that's great. I think it's also great if you want to talk about the quote Wade Phillips in this situation for Mike Macdonald, it would be Leslie Frazier. So Wade Phillips had been a head coach. He knew a lot about coaching in the NFL. He could offer a thought if Sean McVey needed it. Well, Leslie Frazier's been there, done that. He knows this inside and out. He also knows Mike Macdonald. They've worked together. I think the coaching staff, if you look at that as part of this offseason, it's just a fantastic offseason. I mean, I don't think you could have asked for a better outcome on how the coaching staff evolved and how it came together. And I think it puts the Seahawks in position to have a chance. Like, they have a chance. And this is not the best roster in the NFL. It's not even in the top 10. But they have a chance to put something together now that is building towards something great. And who knows? Who knows what Mike Macdonald can do? I do think that they've got a lot of weapons on that defense that a good defensive coordinator, a good defensive mind can make something out of. And not only that, but this play calling, I think that's such an underrated part of it. Sean McVey, he has had a system that he's run, and he started to adjust it. He's changed what kind of running game he's been doing. But he is excellent at just calling the right plays at the right times, understanding what the defense is trying to do, and putting them in position to do the most damage. I think Mike Macdonald's going to be the same way on defense. I think he is going to be somebody that really is thinking along with the other coach across the field and is going to be better than that guy more times than not. And is going to have a chance to go toe-to-toe with these offensive-minded coaches in Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVey. I got another super chat here from Garth. He says, Brian, name the number one defensive and offensive talent on the Hawks for Macdonald to unlock. I mean, offensively, I personally still think Geno Smith is a very good quarterback that has not yet been in a system and with a coaching staff and with an offensive line that's allowed him to do it. So that would be one, but I think I would argue the most important offensive talent, if Mike Macdonald could do one thing, it would be to find a way for Charles Cross to be a top 10 tackle. That would be it. I mean, I could easily make a case for JSN. I could make a case for DK Metcalf. But this offensive line needs to be so much better than it's been. And Charles Cross is an absolute key to that happening. There's some good early reports. He's looking stronger. I know Ryan Grubb is pretty excited about him. Grubb and Huff both have offensive line backgrounds. Let's just hope that they can unlock a little bit more out of him. Because if he's just going to be the player that he's been so far, I think there's a limit to how good this offense can be. No matter how good Geno and how good DK and JSN and other guys are. On defense, man, I mean, Witherspoon's a guy who I think of as a defensive player of the year candidate. So if he can become that, that's the most important thing. If he can become a platinum chip, so to speak, player, greater than blue chip, then that would be huge. I think Byron Murphy is a close second because I think I don't know that he's got defensive player of the year potential. I do think he has Pro Bowl and maybe all pro potential. And if you can have those two guys as your foundation, then you're building something here. It doesn't matter about almost anything else. If those two guys are very good, then you've got something. You've got a corner and you've got a defensive tackle who can be foundation pieces. I could make a case for Tariq Woolen because he also has potential to be one of the best corners in the NFL. But for me, that's not as important as turning Devin Witherspoon into like one of the best players at any position in the NFL. I think he's got that potential. And let's hope, year one to year two, a lot of people say it's the biggest jump. Sometimes it's the offseason where guys are kind of enjoying the fact that they are no longer in school and enjoying the fact that they've got all this money and they don't work quite as hard. Let's hope that Devin Witherspoon is not one of those guys. Let's hope that he comes in and has a better year and is in better condition than he was even as a rookie. But who knows? We'll have to see. We will have to see. All right. I wanted to look at a couple other, mention at least a couple other head coaches that were young guys. In case you were curious. I mentioned Jon Gruden. Bill Cowher was 34 years and 8 months when he became head coach of the Steelers. And as you know, he won a Super Bowl. Mike Tomlin, also one of the youngest coaches ever, 34 years, 10 months. He won a Super Bowl? You're right. Let me double check. But yes, I think Mike Tomlin won a Super Bowl. Let's see. Just double check. Yes, they won a Super Bowl in his second season, as a matter of fact. And then another name worth knowing is Mike Shanahan. Was 35 years, 6 months when he became coach of the Los Angeles Raiders. Obviously, Shanahan would go on to win a Super Bowl, not with the Raiders, but with the Broncos. So I think the answer to this question of do young coaches win in the NFL is kind of predictable. Yes and no. There's a mix in there. When I think about Sean McVey and Lane Kiffin, who are the two youngest to ever do it, both offensive guru kind of guys. One of them, I mean, McVey, although he won a lot, he was not a Super Bowl winner until 2 years ago. Kiffin flamed out. Josh McDaniels, another offensive guru, flamed out, was terrible. Twice he was terrible. But you also have some of the best coaches, the best coach who's ever coached in Don Shula, John Madden, who's one of the best coaches to ever coach, Mike Shanahan, another one, Bill Cowher's on that list. Mike Tomlin is one of the winningest head coaches in history. So you've got a lot of some of the best coaches to ever do it were very young when they started. So I think what I kind of take away from this exploration is that if you're good, you're going to be very good as a young head coach. There's not a lot of examples of these guys where they started off and they were good and then they weren't so good. I mean, Jon Gruden is probably the closest example to that, where he started off pretty well, won a Super Bowl with Tampa, and then faded. And when he came back, wasn't that great either. But for the most part, if the head coach is a good head coach, he's like, at this age, he's likely going to be a great one. So that's the upside here. I mean, the Seahawks could have their head coach for the next decade, 2 decades, who knows? If things work out with Mike Macdonald, I don't think that depends on him winning 12 games this year or having some big. I think what it depends on is that what I want to see is a similar climb on the defensive side of the ball in terms of rankings and performance that we saw for Sean McVay on the offensive side of the ball. I don't think it's realistic to expect what McVay did. McVay went from a 32nd ranked dead last offense to the first ranked offense and more than doubled the amount of points they were scoring. I don't think that's realistic. I don't expect Macdonald to take this to be the number one defense in the league. But it would be a very good sign if Macdonald could take the 25th ranked scoring defense and make it top 10. If he could do that, then I think we've got something. If he could do it top 15, then I think that's still a very good sign. If he takes the 25th ranked scoring defense and takes it to like 23rd, 21st, then I'm a little more concerned. We should see a step forward for this defense, and a pretty significant step forward for this defense if Mike Macdonald's going to be the guy that we all hope he's going to be. All right, everybody. If you haven't already given the show a like and click subscribe, please do so. Appreciate your support, and we're growing the channel still, which is great. You can give me a follow at Hawk Blogger on Twitter and on Instagram. We're really trying to grow the Instagram account. Would love to get more folks on there. And join as a YouTube member. Link is in the chat. It's pinned there. It's in the description of the video. And you can be a Patreon member, patreon.com/hawkblogger. The audio of this episode will be up momentarily for people that are patrons. So patreon.com/hawkblogger, links in the description of the video, and it gets you access to the Slack channel, a bunch of other good stuff where you can meet other people and keep the conversation going. Thanks to everybody who tuned in. Thank you for the super chats, Garth and others, and have a great weekend. I will figure out when I'll be live tomorrow on Saturday. Got to coordinate around some family stuff. Sunday, 2 p.m. is the plan, where we will have Rob Staten and Griff Sturgeon on for a little roundtable. And then I will let you know the schedule for next week as it starts to form. But until then, have a great rest of your Friday. And as always, go Hawks.